Good morning to everyone. Greetings to all producers and industry partners who are today with us. I'm glad to be here in this new Expociruelas and to tell you about how the harvest season was, the one that we're finishing. This analysis will start in March last year with the completion of the harvest 2021, a vision of the producing countries, what happens in Argentina, United States, and France, what happened with our farming tasks, pruning, flowering, setting, and finally, we will see the 2022 harvest and all the analysis we have made for this at this minute. In order to have a context, first, the surface that we have today planted in Chile, according to the last farming census, we are talking about 12,500 hectares. There's a slight decrease with the census update of the 6th region, and there is a decrease of 140 hectares, a very small number. But what we can see is that rather the surface remains constant, with some increases in the plantation because of the booms of the fresh fruit, of fresh exports, but rather we have remained the same during the last few years. As we can see here in the 6th region, it has a high surface, concentrated nearly 70% of this surface close to the Colchagua Valley, and the metropolitan region that for the last year has had a slight decrease because of the cherries and the walnuts boom a couple of years ago. This surface led us to have a production of about 90,000, 85,000, if you can see the last period, from 2016 to 2020. Until 2019, we had a production of about high production and very even, with a consistent increase in time of all the exports of fresh plums. Recently, in 2020, we had a poor production. That year we had frost issues and sunstrokes heavily impact our volumes. However, the harvest of 2021 last year is the worst and probably the worst of the last 10 years. For the industry, have less than 50,000 tons available, with an export of fresh fruits similar to the previous year, but very hit by the rainfalls that we have at the beginning of the harvest by late January 2021. The main reasons explaining this drop are basically three during the last season. And the most important are the rains on January the 30th. Remember that we had rainfalls of up to 100 millimeters in some areas, with a sudden fall of fruit pressure. Fruit started to fall. We had to move very quickly for harvesting with no sugar enough, with no logistic capabilities to pick up so much fruit in such a short time. Apart from that, we had some setting problems in some areas, as the pictures you can see here, where we had some uneven flowerings, fruit that grew too quickly, and other fruit lagged behind, and some orchards that had very poor productions. Finally, affected in some areas significantly, some frosts during the spring that made the orchard to have production of 1,500 dry kilos per hectare. But the biggest problem was the rain that impacted us all very much in terms of volume and quality. Now, regarding the producing countries, unfortunately, they didn't have a better scenario. It was a very complicated year. In case of Argentina, they had heavy frost problems during the flowering and setting that hit them for the third year in a row. And the main cause of their low production is a final harvest of 12,000 tons. Remember, Argentina has a potential of up to 40,000 tons. But during the last few years, they have moved between 10 to 20,000 tons. In case of the United States, they have a a harvest that was low, with a projection of 67,000 by June, and they have a potential of 85 or 90,000 metric tons. However, in July, they had high temperatures in California. There was a lot of wildfires in that period, and this caused a significant loss due to sunstrokes, estimated between 10 to 20% of the harvest. Finally, they estimate a harvest of nearly 53,000 tons. Unfortunately, we don't have the official estimation updated that we always have on the USDA website, but I hope that we can have it available for the next year, because it was available before. Even worse, what happened with France during April. They had a good flowering. However, in April, they have a very heavy frosts with temperatures of -3, -4, with set fruits. And these are the worst frosts for the last 20 years, making the harvest with potential of 35 to 50,000 tons as they had during the last few years was only above 12,000 tons, a very poor harvest. So all the productive countries had a low volume. That leads to the stock levels available are also low. We will see how we can recover this, or how we can recover these volumes as the harvests become or go back to normal. Regarding farming tasks, we faced during May that we had the pruning, and I would say these are the hardest pruning that I've had for the last 10, 15 years, mainly because we were in the middle of the pandemic. We still had the lockdown, and the government provided bonuses for the people not to need, or those who didn't have work they could live. That meant many people just simply to stay at home and not to work. Therefore, the decrease of labor was significant. There were very few people for the pruning tasks. They were not trained with high values for the labor. So pruning was very expensive. We're talking about values of 1,500, 1,800, up to 2,000 pesos. And that is about nearly $2.5 per tree. These values are very high. And because of the lack of labor, poorly trained, the pruning was not pretty good as we would like to. It was really hard to have a good load regulation. And many orchards even were not pruned, or we couldn't prune with topping, lateral toppings, but little regulation. Now, the good thing of all this is that there is an increased use of pneumatic equipment. And when we talk about this, we're talking about the carts, we're talking about equipment mounted on platforms, moved with tractors. We're talking about mounted equipment with hoses, where people do not need a ladder. They can use the scissors, the long reach scissors. And even though this is not a fine pruning such as the traditional one, it has a better performance. We don't have to forget that with these pieces of equipment, we have to do the load regulation. Many times we try to do it fast, but sometimes we forget the goal of the pruning. So even though we use equipment, we have to need to load the regulation. The use of overhead trimmers, it's a good complement, and today we have it as a complementary task to our pruning tasks. Sometimes we started the pruning with these saws, not using scissors and not regulating gauges. Today, it's a complement for manual pruning with this pneumatic equipment. Then with that, we had the flowering. It was a little bit weird, I would say, this year. And why? Because it was not exceeded, it was abundant, given the pruning and the higher loads that we had left. But weird because it was delayed, especially from the south to the northern area. where we had delays of up to 15 days during flowering. Personally, I had never seen such a delay as we could see this year. And the truth is that we didn't know if that flowering delay would mean a load decrease, despite of the pruning or the lower pruning. We didn't know what could happen. Now we had good weather conditions that favored good pollination. And in general, this meant good loads. However, there are some areas where we had frosts during flowering, where we could see the decrease, and also we had late flowering as well in the northern side of Santiago, where the setting was impacted and also the quality. Now I wanted to show you some of the flowering, so the different dates. For instance, here we are. This is September 15th with the La Leonera orchard in the area of Rancagua up to the mountains, and the other one close to Rancagua. At La Leonera orchard, you can see it was very advanced, even compared with the other orchards. And the one in Rancagua, very late. And the next picture is more dramatic. This is for the September the 20th in the central zone of Santiago, and the Polpaico orchard that is located 30 to 40 kilometers north of Santiago. It looked like it was in the middle of the winter. So this orchard had the flowering on October the 5th, very, very late against a normal year. As I said, the setting started to look like very significant. We also had a pruning that was kind of light, good weather conditions during flowering, and this made that much setting appeared everywhere. And when we see this, there are some years where we could see yellow fruits, but now all the fruits was so strong, and we had darts with sprouts that had 4, 5, 7 fruits per sprout. When we always talk about a normal setting, should have between 1.3, 1.8 fruits per sprout. We started counting, and we could see that there was in general an overload. I would say the only zone we didn't have this was in the northern part of Santiago, and very specific orchards due to the frost events. But the rest of the country, from winter to south, all the coastal area with high setting performances. When we talk about high loads, we're talking about the counting of 7,000 up to 10,000 fruits per year. These quantities that we know required clearing for that volume. However, usually the clearing was avoided in some cases because we knew that we had a very good commercial year. Therefore, we didn't work hard on this as we should have in order to clear and live regulated loads. Now, what was the problem? As I said, high loads, very high in most of the countries, in the areas of the countries, not enough clearing, and sometimes we didn't do any clearing, and these low loads in the orchards of the northern parts of Santiago. For the rest of the country, with very high loads. So this led us to have an estimation during November, as we always do with the technical committee, the agronomists of the company. We meet and we share the information, and we had a projection, and we agreed on a harvest on the trees that we could be nearly 55,000 dry tons. The potential of Chile, according to our estimation, is about 97,000 dry tons. So we had a projection of a good volume, and also we thought that the fresh fruit export was going to grow significantly against the last year, the 10,000 tons, and with a projection of about 15,000 tons. This meant an availability of raw material of about 70,000 tons for the plants. With this number, we started to work, and from then on, we checked and reviewed until the beginning of the harvest. Then, during December, we had the sales of most of the industry, and in this chart we can see the average weight prices of the industry from the exporting companies. There are some who have better prices or lower prices. Especially this year, we checked that the companies that had lower volumes and they could play and speculate during the year and sell the high price requests, they had sales of different kinds, unlike the other years that are similar. Despite of all that, these sales up to the caliber 120, 144, in all the calibers, it's about $1 above than the previous year. Therefore, very good year for the producers. This allows us to work in time to have a preparation of our orchards. This is pretty good. Now, following with the year, we are positioned now in January 2022, where the fresh fruits export started. This year, slightly later than the previous year, with pressure, heavy pressure from the fresh industry. We thought that the volumes would not be that high, but there was a lot of pressure. And of the increase of production that we have from 2019, that record of 17,500 tons, we had a new record for the fruit export. This year, according to the official information from the Exporters Association, 54,500 tons of fresh fruit were exported. And here the variety, this is not fresh fruit. And here we take in Darjen and sugar plum, the two sugar plums, and this represents an increase of 112% against the previous year. So this piece of information, we didn't expect it to be so high, and we will see how this impacts for the next year. We had a previous season with very good sales, in average about $2 per fresh kilo. So this is a good business to complement the profitability of the dried fruit. And in general, good quality. The producers have learned to do their work properly. Even though at first it was a green start, later we had better sugar qualities and color. Therefore, we expect that we will have a good season for export of fresh plum fruits. In case of harvest and dried fruits, we thought that we could start a little bit later, given that the late flowering that we had. But finally, it was in similar dates, even though we thought that we could start by February the 14th. We had high temperatures between the day 5 or 6, and this caused a little pressure drop in the fruit, and some producers started to harvest on the day 7th. And I would say that we started on the 14th, and we continued until early March mostly. We had a good fruit, a finished fruit, despite the high loads, fruit with good sugar, 20 bricks and above, with lots. Even the second and third week, fruit with 26, 28 bricks. So very good. We didn't see that much of boozy fruit on the drying fields, with a good drying. And the volumes of the harvest, as we moved on, were slightly higher than expected. Maybe the calibers a little bit lower than projected. But I would say in general, we had a very good season. And this is what we show here. So we had very favorable drying conditions, high temperatures, slight rainfalls happened on February the 23rd in the central zone. That was about 1 or 2 millimeters concentrated in the in the 7th region in Talca, San Javier, where we had about 5 or 10 or 12 millimeters. However, the ground was very dry, so it didn't cause any trouble actually. Unlike the previous year, this year we always had good conditions, dry conditions that allow the fruit to dry in a good manner. The quality of the fruit was excellent, a finished fruit with a good flavor, and the conversions that despite we still are drying fruits, we believe that it's going to be between 3.2 to 3.3 per fresh kilo. Here we have the impression that we will have for the year, but very good quality, very good fruit conditions, what we had in the plants. With this review, with this harvest base, what we have seen, we believe that the harvest, including fresh fruit export, instead of the 85 initial tons, we believe that it's going to be about 90,000 metric tons, so pretty close to the harvest of 2019. Out of this, we have 90,000 as a total, 19,000 for fresh fruit. So we're talking about 53 million kilos. With a conversion of 3:2, we are about 16 to 65 dry tons. And we always had a percentage of loss in the harvest that we cannot pick up, and export discards that, even though they go back to the industry, this is part of the statistics as rejected fruit. And with this, we have a projection of about 71,000 tons, slightly above 70,000 that we had as total raw material. Now, the caliber that we had as a projection is between 80 to 82 units per pound, a little bit smaller than the previous season. And with these numbers, we could project according to the calibration curves that 80% is going to be caliber 100, 19 to 20% below 100. Therefore, that is available for the season. We're talking about 60,000 tons as total raw material. We have to discount then the losses, the waste, etc. Finally, what we always talk and try to show is that we have to be good producers to produce sweet and good quality fruit, that the trade of the plums is good. People enjoy this, working together to take care of our industry that we love. Thank you very much.